Hello. Hello, everyone. Is it working? Is it good? Okay, good. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Denver Public Library, to our Central Library. I am so glad to see this group of people here. My name is Liesl Schmidt. I work at Denver Public Library as a Kids Services Administrator, and I'm glad to see all the young people here. This is awesome. Yeah. You know, applaud those kids, you're right? So here's what's happening today. We are here to learn and to share and to grow together. We hope that this is a comfortable and respectful and friendly place of learning. I'm so thrilled that Dr. Kendi is here to share his knowledge with us. And yeah, I think this is gonna be a really cool event. Here's what we can expect. So we'll start with a welcome from our partners at Greater Denver Cares, and then you'll get a chance to hear Dr. Kendi and Cody Egert have a conversation. Then you'll get a chance to talk to each other. And that's when we will collect your questions, if you're writing questions on index cards. And then we'll hear from an amazing group of teens who are here to ask their own questions and who will read some of the audience questions. We're so thrilled to have these teenagers here to be some of our moderators. And at the end, we'll wrap up by sharing with people nearby, sharing one thing we learned or that we liked. This is your space here at the Central Library, so feel free to make yourself comfortable. Take a break if you need to. Go out in the lobby, take a break. If you need restrooms or a water fountain, those are out, and turn left as you go out the door. If you need help, our team is here to help. And thank you so much. We are so glad you came. And here's Crystal from the Bookies.
Hello, I'm Crystal Murphy. I'm with the Bookies bookstore. We wanted to thank you all again for coming, and we wanted to give a huge thank you to Denver Public Libraries for purchasing all of the books that you all received tonight. If we want to give them a big round of applause, yeah. We wouldn't be able to do this without their support, so we just wanted to say thank you. I am proud to introduce Gloria Neal tonight. Before we begin today's conversation, we want to take a moment to recognize the woman setting the tone for this important gathering. Gloria Neal is an award-winning journalist, respected civic leader, and unwavering voice for equity and accountability. With over 2 decades in broadcast journalism, Gloria has built a career on asking the right questions and never backing down from the truth. Whether on air, in the newsroom, or in the community, she's a trusted source of clarity and context during some of the most pivotal moments in our local and national conversations. But her impact reaches far beyond the mic. Gloria has also served in key leadership roles across government, philanthropy, and public affairs, most recently working on critical issues like housing equity, racial justice, and civic engagement in communities across Colorado. She's a connector, a convener, and someone who believes deeply in using her platform to lift others and push the conversation forward. She brings to this event not only her voice and presence, but her lived commitment to justice, storytelling, and truth. So, as we open today's event, an event rooted in healing, learning, and liberation, we are honored to have her light the spark and set the tone. Please join me in welcoming the brilliant and bold Mrs. Gloria Neal.
I was telling her I was going to take the stairs, but I'm just going to hop right on up here. How are y'all doing this evening? Yeah, y'all are good? It is so good to see so many young folks up in here. Not that the older, younger people is a problem. Y'all are welcome too. But it is, and I'm one of those, but it is just so good because as you all know, so much is going on in this world, and we need to be here tonight. So I want to thank Crystal for that phenomenal introduction. It is certainly something that I do because I want to be here and because it is my community too. I don't just live in the Black community, I live in the community, as all of you do as well. So good evening, and thank you all for joining us this evening. We've gathered in this moment that really demands courage, clarity, and community, and we're honored to welcome 2 visionaries who are all about leadership and leading that charge with wisdom and unwavering devotion and purpose. First, before she comes to the stage, please allow me to tell you a little bit about Cody Egert. She is the executive director of Greater Denver Cares, which is a proud affiliate of the National Cares Mentoring Movement. National Cares was founded by the legendary Susan L. Taylor, former editor-in-chief of Essence magazine. I know y'all know who she is. Yeah, clap, y'all clap. I'm sure she's gonna watch the recording, so she'll be like, oh, they clap for me, so that's a good thing. Y'all clap, that's wonderful. It was founded by her, of course, her being the editor-in-chief of the magazine called Essence. Following Hurricane Katrina, though, Susan saw that the storm ravaged Black communities in ways that was far more than just flooding them out. She says it was an ongoing trauma and ongoing inequities and loss that so many of our children carried as a result of that hurricane. And out of that need, Susan created National Cares. It continues to be a call to action to heal, to mentor, and to uplift Black children by surrounding them with consistent, culturally grounded love and support. It remains the only national organization specifically focused on the emotional, academic, and spiritual well-being of Black youth, addressing root causes, not just the symptoms, which is extremely important. And that's where my path crossed with Susan. I interviewed her in Atlanta, Georgia, for the National Cares Movement. It was an event she was holding there, and I was a news anchor down there at the time. And she just blew me away, but more importantly, the organization, what it stood for, blew me away. And so as I became more involved in the CARES movement, National Cares, I came back to Denver and, of course, found out that through Susan, there was an office here, and Stephen Powell was an individual who has been with her since the inception, and I'm sure he wishes he could be here tonight, but he is another mover and shaker who, let's just say, Susan does not move without him. But the person that is here that I met, who also does not move without Susan and she without her, is Cody Egert. So she has been under the local leadership of Greater Denver Cares, and she has brought the mission to life here in Denver. So she'll tell you more about herself as we get this going. As a school-based program, Greater Denver Cares partners directly with schools to basically walk alongside students and families and educators, creating a presence that is consistent, community-rooted, and responsive to the needs of Black youth. And I know all of those things are extremely important. Through culturally anchored wellness circles, the program offers safe spaces for truth-telling, reflection, and healing, all of it rooted in our traditions, our language, and resilience. And so it is through that Greater Denver Cares places reading, hence the library. What do y'all think of the new library? They did a wonderful job. There's no question about it. But reading at the center of all of this liberation. So, joining Cody in the conversation today is someone whose scholarship, courage, and tenacity have helped reshape the way our nation talks about race, policy, and power. It has been absolutely phenomenal to read some of his writings. How many people were familiar with Dr. Kendi prior to this evening? Raise your hands high, don't be shy. That's awesome. That's awesome. That is great, because that means each one of you are advocates. Individuals who can go out and spread goodwill and stop with the nonsense. Dr. Kendi, right? We need it. I don't believe in alternate facts. It's the truth or it is a lie. Dr. Kendi is the #1 New York Times bestselling author, MacArthur Genius Fellow, and one of the most important public intellectuals of our time when it comes to having honest conversations about Black folks in America. Through books like Stamped from the Beginning, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and his latest, Malcolm Lives, a biography of Malcolm X for young leaders and readers. He continues to arm us with the language, the history, and the tools we all need to move toward justice. At Boston University, Dr. Kendi founded and led the Center for Anti-Racist Research, one of the first of its kind, and there he built a groundbreaking interdisciplinary hub that connected research, journalism, policy, and also community work, because all of it is intertwined, turning all that into ideas, into action, and data into real social change. Now, he's about to take that vision to Howard University. So let me give y'all a little test. Ain't you? You know. Come on now. That's absolutely right. Howard University is the crown jewel of academic excellence. Dr. Kendi continues to expand his anti-racist scholarship and training now at Howard, one of the nation's leading HBCUs. It's also helping to shape the next generation of thinkers, teachers, and freedom fighters. Together, Cody Egert and Dr. Ibram X. Kendi represent a shared vision that is rooted in direct action and systemic change and deep care and rigorous truth-telling, and most importantly, in an unshakable belief in our collective futures. In other words, it's not about anybody being comfortable. It is about the truth and how DE&I has made this country the success it is today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ibram X. Kendi and Executive Director Cody Egert. Please clap for them. Come on up here, baby. Awesome. You are so welcome. You are so welcome. Oh, and here's yours, Cody. Here's your mic.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Hello, how's everyone doing this afternoon? Okay. Okay, so how's everyone doing? Good, oh my goodness, so it's almost a full house. I'm a little nervous. So thank you so much, Dr. Kendi, I'm so excited. He's visited multiple areas in Denver today. So we were at Shorter AME this morning, working with students from DPS, educators this afternoon. And so now this evening, he is speaking with community. So it has been a long day and we are so grateful for you. So, Dr. Kendi, Malcolm X once said, "Education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today." Your new book, Malcolm Lives, is a passport for young readers who may be encountering Malcolm for the first time. So what do you believe Malcolm X still has to teach young people today, and why was it urgent for you to bring his voice back into their hands right now?
Well, I'm so excited to be here with each of you. I'm so glad we're able to have this conversation. When you asked that question, I sat here and I'm like, I thought of like 15 different things, but we don't have that much time. We need to get to other questions. So I'm just going to mention two in terms of what Malcolm has to teach to young people and really to the rest of us as well. I think first, that it's possible to transform the world, to radically transform the world, to revolutionize the world, and that if we aren't trying to eliminate the social problems that plague us, then what are we doing? If we're not getting at the root of the systemic harms that are afflicting us, then what are we doing? And secondly, Malcolm, and I had to relearn this when I conducted the research for this book, and that is that Malcolm is facing many of the challenges and adversities that young people are facing. And Malcolm moved about three times before he was 3 years old. His father was killed when he was about 6 years old. He believes his father was lynched in Lansing, Michigan. His mother was denied the insurance money that they had been paying to support the family in case his father was killed, which then plunged the family of 8 children and his mother into deep hunger and poverty. Malcolm was consistently picked on at school. He and his brothers and sisters were the only black children at their school, and so they were constantly bullied and picked on. Malcolm ultimately started to basically go to downtown stores and steal apples in order to eat. Malcolm, eventually his mother, under the strain of the weight of trying to care for 8 children, and social workers and welfare officials coming to her home to belittle her and to demean her in front of her children, buckled under the pressure and ultimately was carried away to an insane asylum. And then his siblings were broken up and put into detention homes. And then ultimately Malcolm moved when he was about 15 years old to Boston, where he ultimately started engaging in law breaking and was arrested at 20. I'm mentioning all of that because there's so many young people who are being picked on at school, or who are facing hunger, or who are facing poverty, or who are having to move, right, and uplift themselves and should uproot themselves and make new friends, the challenges of that, or young people who are in detention homes, or young people who are engaged with the criminal legal system, who the rest of us think that they can't become great, that they can't become someone as influential as Malcolm X when Malcolm X did. And so why can't one of those youth do?
So what I do appreciate about the book, and it is a phenomenal book. I mean, it is written for young readers, but I enjoyed it because what I appreciated about it is that you dove a little bit deeper into Malcolm's parents and their dynamics and their relationship with each other and their relationship with the world around them. So I thought that was really fascinating because of course, Malcolm X is Malcolm X, but I'm always so curious about his mother and everything that she went through, his father, his siblings. I think that's so important to who he is or who he was. And you clearly worked very closely with the Malcolm X estate on this book. How did that shape the story that you wanted to tell? And would you be able to tell us exactly who you worked with? Because I know, I was just curious if you worked with any of his daughters or...
So with his daughters.
Okay.
And I think the biggest way that it actually shaped the story is, first, I was incredibly nervous, right? It's one thing to work on a biography of a particular figure. It's another thing to be working with the Malcolm X estate, as you're doing that. But they gave me the freedom to actually be a scholar and tell the fullness, of his story. But of course, I just don't want to deny that there's a certain level of pressure, right? But sometimes pressure is good, right? When we approach an important project and we're nervous and we want to do it well, that means we're going to put in a level of rigor, that ensures that the product hopefully is better than another project in which, we got this, and we sort of enter into it with sort of, our ego in tow. The second way is which in the book, you'll see that there are a whole host of never before seen or published letters that Malcolm wrote, or that was written to Malcolm X. You see his date book. There are images of Malcolm himself. And so they gave me access and gave us the ability to publish these elements so that we can fully be immersed, in Malcolm. You can literally see his handwriting, both in English and when he started to try to write Arabic.
Yeah, that is cool. So did you have any new insights from reading those letters and just some of the more intimate encounters that you had with whether it's his daughters or just with some of his private collections?
So I wrote most of this book in 2022, 2021, 2023. And I mention this in relation to your question because Malcolm, particularly the last year and especially the last 2 years of his life, was under a tremendous amount of strain. And he faced a number of different threats. And so reading his descriptions and his notations and his revelations, about these threats, and even the way in which he was being misrepresented in the public, and me, in a way, experiencing something similar, although certainly not on the scale, and seeing other people experiencing it similarly, it gave me a certain level of insight into what he was facing, and why he made particular decisions that he did. I'm trying not to give it away because you're going to actually, read it, but I do think that as a biographer, it becomes helpful when you can relate to the subject that you're writing about. And I think that adds a certain level of nuance and color, to the story.
So kind of going back to Malcolm's parents. Mm-hmm. So I was particularly intrigued by Louise Little's story. And I think, one, because once her husband was killed, she was a single parent, and I'm a single parent. And so, and she was a single parent of 8 children. So, I think looking at it from her perspective, I know that she was committed to, what would be the right terminology? Not a insane asylum, but it was a mental health institution, mm-hmm. Or mental illness institution. It's, you go through so much and you can be definitely broken. And I feel like her and Malcolm's relationship was not relationship, but their journey was very similar in terms of just everything that they went through. But I'm speaking to just the transformation, whereas his mom was broken, but he transformed. Can you speak more to just the transformations with his mother and with Malcolm?
So I was looking for a part. I can come back to it later, but so I really tried to really detail how Louise Little arrived from a place in which she was this sort of boisterous, bold, committed, fearless woman who, to give an example, when Malcolm literally is in her womb, and her husband, Earl, is away preaching in Milwaukee, in the middle of the night, the Klan comes to her doorstep. And, one of the opening scenes is her interacting with the Klan. And let me just say that, she did not hold any punches, despite her being there, all these Klansmen with weapons. And that fearlessness, right, in many ways was her birthright to Malcolm. So I tried to, how did she get from that place to a place in which she is found, I believe it's around December of 1938, 13 years later, holding her youngest baby and she's walking in the snow with no shoes, sort of mumbling. How did she arrive from that point to that point? And a lot of it was the structure of racism, right? And so I tried to really detail that. And frankly, the other thing I think is important to understand, and I mentioned this in the narrative, is that she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, or what's now called schizophrenia. It was a more demeaning term then. When in fact, she had just given birth to her 8th child. And there are at least 2 different conditions, postpartum conditions, that she potentially could have had, that because likely she was a Black woman, they did not even consider, those conditions. And so ultimately, she spends the next, I believe, 24 years, in that facility. And frankly, Malcolm, Malcolm rarely spoke about his mother in public. And I think part of the reason why he rarely spoke about her in public is because one of the things that led to her strain was that him and his brother Philip, who was the closest to him in age, during those periods in which they were hungry, and their older brother was in Boston working and sending back money, they would take some of that money, which would then only increase the strain on the family. And he remembered that. He never forgot that. And he never forgot how much harder that made it for his mother. And he was in deep regret, as you would imagine. But he was only a child, right? So of course he's understanding his actions as a 12-year-old or an 8-year-old boy from the standpoint of a 30-year-old. And we sometimes don't give ourselves enough grace, but he, of course, I wish that we would actually spend more time talking about Malcolm's relationship to his mother and her life, because I think in many ways he followed in her footsteps.
I definitely think he did. I just think his transformation, of course, was such a beautiful transformation, but it definitely I can see so many parallels between him and his mother. So you often said that. You often said that anti-racist education. So we're going to kind of transition a little bit. You've often said that anti-racist education begins with truth-telling. In what ways do you hope Malcolm Lives reframes how young people understand American history?
Well, actually, I found the passage that I was looking for. And do y'all mind if I just read it?
Yes.
Because I think it, I would try to build up the narrative and then try to summarize the narrative. And so welfare officials took Malcolm. So Malcolm is actually taken from his mother before she's sent to that prison, placed him in foster care with the Kohanas family, where he would eat dinner sometimes after school. Louise resisted but couldn't stop it. The stress of her husband dying was too much. The stress of having no money was too much. The stress of racist welfare workers was too much. The stress of Malcolm getting in trouble with the law was too much. The stress of Malcolm being taken was too much. The stress of having another mouth to feed after her 8th child arrived was too much. The stress of the father of her 8th child leaving was too much. It all became too much in 1938. A neighbor probably saw Louise walking barefoot in the snow with her child. She needed help, but too few people had truly helped her since Earl died. That was why she was here, cold to the cold around her, because the racist world had been cold to her. You should probably repeat your question.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay. So I'll repeat it one more time. So in what ways do you hope Malcolm Lives reframes how young people understand American history? With that being said.
Yeah, so much of this narrative is set in scenes. You know, scenes like this one from Malcolm's life or the life of people who are close to him. And in those scenes, as much as possible, I'm not only narrating the scenery or not only narrating the policies or the rules that are, let's say, harming Malcolm or his family, or that he's ultimately challenging. I'm also trying to connect the origin of those rules and potentially if those rules are existing today. So I'm trying to sort of narrate Malcolm's life, and then at key moments, almost giving like a very, very short history lesson. When I say short, like one sentence, because that's all you got, right? Particularly with young people, just give it to me straight. And so I try to sort of layer onto the story of Malcolm history. You know, the history of racism, you know, American history, in ways that, you know, are obviously are engaging. And so I'm hoping that students and young people and even the rest of us, as we read this book, we get a better understanding of the history of racism, we get a better understanding of American history.
Perfect, thank you. So with all of your books, you know, in districts, and we see what's going on with just everything that's going on in terms of books being banned. How do you, because I guess my question is, working in the school system, I know that, you know, we want certain books part of the curriculum. How do you, or how would you suggest we go about getting either this book as part of the curriculum, or really pressing upon families to be able to share in engaging with Malcolm Lives? Because what I have found is, of course, kids are not reading as much as they should unless it is required reading. And could you even give suggestions as far as how families can engage with Malcolm Lives together?
Well, let me just say, I find that when we read books with our young people, it's actually quite engaging. So we typically stop reading with our young people when they're, 3 years old or 4 years old or 5 years old, when in fact, even when they're 10 years old, or even 14 years old, I mean, you can literally read with your partner. Like, y'all are having an argument about something, and let's read a book together and sort of settle this argument together. You know, reading obviously is a social, is a personal, individual exercise, but we can make it social. And I think the more we make it social, the more we make it engaging. That then also allows, if we're reading a book like Malcolm Lives or another book, you know, with young people that we love or that we're teaching, when they have questions or when we have questions, we can then engage in the praxis of what? Figuring out those answers together. So it also sort of models just the general practice of learning, of curiosity. We are able to model for them our curiosity. We're able to model for them that we don't know everything. Hey, actually, I don't know the answer to that question. Let's figure it out. Let's go to the library and find an answer. And so that's, to me, why, you know, reading books together, you know, with our young people can be so powerful.
So going a little bit, I just want to, again, shift one more time. So you're stepping into a powerful role, new role at Howard University. What excites you most about returning to an HBCU, especially at this moment in history or moment in time?
So I think Howard in particular has had a quite storied history supporting scholars who are studying racism. And so to be able to go to a place in which I can literally walk in the footsteps of generations of scholars who were serious about understanding and combating, anti-Black racism, that's ultimately what excites me. And then to be able to create an institute that is going to support the faculty there and the students there, as well as bring to campus other intellectuals and creators who are engaged in this work to almost help Howard to continue to be one of the sort of centers for anti-racist knowledge, in the world is precisely why I'm going there and why I'm excited. And frankly, a century ago, in this country, the Congress had just passed an Immigration Act that pretty much barred immigrants from Asia, limited immigrants from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, limited immigrants from Africa. It was imagined that those immigrants were coming to destroy this country. At the same time, the vast majority of the global South was colonized. At the same time, many African Americans were forced to live in apartheid conditions in this country. And at the same time, children like Malcolm X in Lansing, Michigan, was being taught, was being assigned books like Little Black Sambo, or the history books that they were reading had a single paragraph on Black history. And I write about in Malcolm Lives how after the teacher finished reading that very short paragraph, then his teacher proceeded to make fun of Black people before the whole class, something Malcolm never forgot. So he actually, when he was in school, he hated history because of the way that history books talked about Black people and because of the way his history teachers talked about Black people. This was the country a century ago. And at that time, there were faculty at Howard who decided that they were going to put forth their best intellectual efforts to, in the movement against Jim Crow, in the movement against colonization. And so 1925 quite sounds a little bit familiar, right? People are literally trying to take us back to a time in which students are being given books like Little Black Sambo, and since every other type of book is banned, or students are giving books like Mein Kampf, since every other book is banned except that one.
So speaking in regards to Malcolm X, when he was younger, he did have a teacher that he admired, that when he told that teacher he wanted to be an attorney, that teacher redirected him and said he should be a carpenter, I want to say. And I just think that is interesting because that ties into what we see today with young men. And particularly on HBCU campuses, where the ratios are ridiculous. It's roughly about 17-1. And I feel that a lot of that is because we are redirecting our young men from the world of academia into everything else. And so, it's just going to be interesting what the world is going to look like as far as our male Black leaders in the next 10 to 15 years. So with that being said, how do you think, again, through Malcolm's life, how can we re-engage young men in again, reading, education, and just getting excited about whether it's through religion, whether it's through whatever it might be, but just getting them excited about wanting to further their education or just about school, period?
So I think whether it's youth in general, or specifically black male youth, it was intentional. For instance, the book cover was intentional. The fact that we have a Malcolm X rising out of books was intentional, because if you talk to Malcolm X, the singular thing that allowed him to become this global icon, one of the greatest orators in American history, this sort of globe-trotting revolutionary, was books. And so I think that it allows young black men who are reading his story, and young black men admire Malcolm X almost commonly. But what I don't think most young black men know, or young black boys know, is the role that books played and academics played, you know, in Malcolm's greatness. And so that's why I'm actually incredibly excited to get this book in the hands of black male youth, of male youth, of youth in general, particularly those youth who are not really reading like I was when I was in high school, as an example, because so much of the book, particularly the climax of the book, in the middle of the book, Malcolm explicitly talks about how reading liberated him. Like, it literally freed him. And he talks about this in the context in which he's incarcerated. So that's a pretty powerful statement. You're literally in prison, and you're saying that book freed you. And so I think I am hoping, and if this book does nothing else, if it doesn't allow for young people to go on to transform the world, if it causes them to read another book, then I feel like I did something.
Definitely. That is huge, yeah. Okay, so one of the most powerful chapters, to me, in Malcolm Lives was titled African Unity. It reminds us that Malcolm didn't just see racism as an American problem, he saw it as a global system rooted in colonialism, capitalism, and control. His advocacy for African unity wasn't symbolic, it was strategic. Sorry, it's kind of a long question. So today we are seeing leaders like President Ibram Traore in Burkina Faso speak boldly about African sovereignty, rejecting neo-colonial influence, and recentering the people. It feels like the spirit of Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first president, is alive again through President Traore. How do you see Malcolm Lives continuing that legacy, connecting young readers to the global dimension of Black liberation on a global scale?
So Malcolm, in the last year of his life, not only travels to Mecca, where of course he has this religious and intellectual transformation, but he also travels throughout the continent of Africa, meeting with presidents, meeting with people who literally led decolonial struggles, like Kwame Nkrumah, like Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, like Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, and he's meeting with them. His main purpose in meeting with them is he was trying to lobby or advocate for an African nation to go before the United Nations and charge the United States with violating the human rights of African Americans. He wanted the United States in the 1960s to be seen and ridiculed in the way South Africa was coming to be seen and ridiculed across the world. And so, but he was also, to your point, trying to create unity. One of the things that he was finding, and this allowed him to develop almost a front row seat in what Kwame Nkrumah would ultimately call neo-colonialism, in which you had literally African presidents who were as radical as Malcolm X, but were also hesitant to go before the UN. And why? Because they were receiving aid, quote unquote, from the United States, which they were using to rebuild their nations. To give an example, in France, when the people of Guinea, under a leader by the name of Sékou Touré, was able to liberate their nation from French colonialism, literally the French, when they left, they took everything. Like, even like phones, like they stripped the nation of everything. So these nations literally had to rebuild their infrastructure and rebuild in so many different ways. So they needed aid to do that. Then there was also the CIA that in many cases were able to topple many of these leaders who Malcolm ended up meeting with, and they were worried about injecting themselves in the internal politics of the US, which then would almost cause the CIA to be even more entangled in their own internal politics. And then in addition to that, these African leaders were also trying to discern this larger Cold War, which was a hot war in Africa. I'm mentioning this because specifically as it related to aid, Malcolm started using the term dollarism to sort of explain how he felt these African leaders were being controlled still, by the United States, by England, by France, and he urged them to free themselves of this dollarism so that they can form revolutionary sort of solidarity with people, throughout the global South. And so that was something that Malcolm was engaged in very privately. But it also allowed him to, again, understand the role that capitalism and colonialism and imperialism and even neocolonialism was playing in still sort of capturing and controlling, Africa.
Interesting. Just out of curiosity, through your work at Howard, are you working on a global scale? Do you have those connections with the leaders of Ghana, Rwanda, Burkina Faso?
So that is the plan.
That is the plan?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So there's been so much fear and resistance around words like equity and anti-racist education. What would you say to someone listening who feels unsure, maybe even defensive about these conversations? And how do we keep the door open without compromising the message of Malcolm Lives?
So I think that we're living in a time in which we have quite powerful forces trying to bind us in fear, trying to get us to not fight for what's right or do what's right because we fear what could happen to us. We could lose our jobs, we could not get that opportunity, we could be ostracized, and on and on. And I just think it's important for us to balance those very real fears with what could happen to us if we don't resist. And if you want to have an idea of what could happen to this country if we don't resist, you can just go to Germany in 1933 or 1932. And then see what happened after that.
So, and finally, before we get to our teen moderators, when a young person finishes this book, what do you hope stays with them?
Their power. Their power.
Yeah. I love that. All righty. So, who is up? And oh, you're gonna, okay.
Thank you both. That was amazing. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. What a great talk. I've chills, talking about access to books that reflect kids' experiences and that speak to kids is, it's close to our heart at the library. So we're very grateful to have you. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick moment for us to engage with each other. It's a chance for us to kind of engage, talk, think about the conversation that Cody and Dr. Kendi just had. And so the question I have for you, and you can turn to someone near you, it could be someone you know, someone in your family, a friend, or someone new, and talk about what matters to you, what you believe in, and how you let other people know what you believe in. While you're doing that, while you're having that conversation, our teen moderators are going to come up. They're going to get themselves ready. And Crystal from the Bookies is going to collect your questions. So if you wrote a question on an index card, Crystal is coming down the center aisle, so you can pass your question to the center aisle, and Crystal will pick it up, and our teen moderators will help moderate that discussion. Teens, come on up. So our teens are coming on up. But you all turn to each other and talk about what matters to you and how you let people know.
We're going to come out with a... So one of the things I want to do is, so we're going to be creating a fellowship program that allows, let's say, faculty to come to the Institute for a year and finish a research project. And we want to have specific fellows for HBCUs. So which would allow a Hampton faculty member who wants to work on a book, let's say, to be able to come for a year and literally be in that space and work on that project, which then allows that person to advance in their own career, which then allows them to have a year off from teaching, come back refreshed. So we're hoping to build these HBCU fellowships that can really allow for more research productivity throughout the HBCUs. Yeah. Oh, I agree. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I agree. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Oh, shoot. Oh, shoot. Okay.
There was some really good conversation going on, which is awesome. Let's keep it going. Now we're going to have this group of brilliant teens moderate the next part of the discussion. We are so lucky to have them here. They are a group of teens who work with Greater Denver Cares and also some teens who advise Denver Public Library at the Teen Advisory Board at the Hadley branch. And yeah, we're thrilled to have them here. I know I'm nervous talking on the microphone, so I can only imagine some of them might be too, but I know super supportive group, so I'm really thrilled they're here. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to go down the row. Each of the teams is going to ask one of their questions, and then we'll go this way, and then we'll go this way, and then we're also going to have them ask some of the questions that you all submitted on your index cards. I'll keep track of the time, y'all, and I'll kind of try to give a warning when we're getting close to time. But yeah, I'll let them take it away. So let's give them a big round of applause.
Is my microphone on? Oh wait, is it on? Oh. My first question is, first, my name is Kai, for everyone who didn't need to know. Oh wait, is it not on? Oh.
Remember to lean in close.
Oh, okay. Oops, my bad, y'all. So, if you don't know, my name is Kai. My first question is, as a young person, what advice do you have for a young person trying to challenge the systematic racism in a community that resists to change?
Well, I first would say don't take no for an answer.
Okay.
This nation was resistant to liberating black people, or eliminating, I should say, abolishing slavery for over 250 years, but black people never stopped pressing for that, and even white abolitionist allies. And so the unwillingness of forces to change should never sort of sap your fuel to transform those systems.
Hi, my name is Yanali. What would you say was your best piece of work out of all your books? Yeah.
So asking an author what was their best book is like asking a parent who's your best kid. So I'm gonna give a PC answer. Can I do that? Because I think when parents are forced, they typically either say their oldest or their youngest. Sorry, the middle kids. So I'll say my youngest, which is Malcolm Lives.
Hi, my name is Nasira, and my question is, how can authors and community organizations work together to foster a love for reading and tell stories among the youth?
To me, the reason why some young people do not love reading is because they haven't been exposed to books that are worthy of love. And so what that means is, I'm happy you asked, what can authors do? Because that means it's on us to create books that young people will love. And obviously it's on the rest of us to find those books and put it before young people. And so if a child is not reading, instead of us looking down on that child, we need to look in the mirror for the problem.
Okay. Hi, my name is Adia, and my question is, what advice would you give to a young student of color when facing challenges in the educational system?
So many of those challenges, when you speak up and speak out about them, people tell you that almost you're not seeing what you're seeing, you're not experiencing what you're experiencing, which then can cause you to start thinking, well, am I the problem? And I just want to my one piece of advice is to never internalize the notion that you're the problem. And that these challenges are constantly conveying to black and brown children, just as they are to girls just as they are to low-income children, just as they are to children with disabilities, that the challenges that they're facing those challenges because there's something wrong with them. And I just want to encourage our young people to realize that there's nothing wrong with you and everything wrong with those challenges that you're facing.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Zachary. I have a question, which is, with the amount of controversy surrounding youth heading into next steps, whether that's college or employment, how would you encourage them to avoid being apathetic and show concern and activism towards preserving their futures and or culture?
Well, can I speak to the young people? The adults, you can close your ears. I would just convey to young people that you can't rely on us adults. Like, so when you're thinking about the world you want to live in, you should rely on yourselves and your peers. Because unfortunately, we as adults, we failed you. We've created a world that is becoming increasingly challenging by the day. And so I just want you to rely on yourself and your generation to transform this world. And frankly, a lot of adults are relying on you, as well.
My name's Aiden, and my question is, what experience inspired you to speak up and teach the youth about anti-racism?
The very fact that I was a young person who was trying to understand why certain things were happening to me, and I wasn't necessarily being told by the books that I was reading or forced to read in classes, by my teachers, by other people, and I also wanted to be a part of that struggle to stop those things from happening, and nobody was also giving me a blueprint for how to do that either. And so remembering my days as a young person, and I can only imagine what young people are facing today. And then finally, I'll also say that there was a recent study that found that Black teenagers are facing 5 racist incidents per day. Just to give you the scale. And I suspect, brown and Asian children are facing, higher levels as well. And so can you imagine, constantly facing that, whether it's, a teacher that continuously doesn't call on you, or you leave school and you go into that store and everybody's following you around, or you leave the store and now you see that cop car that's following you, and that's just regular, constant, day in and day out, and nobody's teaching you about what's happening to you and why it's happening to you, which then is going to result in you thinking, again, you're the problem. That's happening to you because you're the problem. And then you start thinking you're the problem, then it affects you academically, and then they think you're even more of the problem, right? And it becomes this sort of cycle. And no, I'm not. I know that I faced that as a young person, and I don't want any young people facing that. And that's why I do this work.
My name is Brian, and my question is, to you, why is it so important for anti-racism to be taught today, especially to the youth of today?
So, I've spoken about children of color. I also want to talk about white youth. I was at a school recently, and I think it was a predominantly white school, and I was on a panel with a student, and that student, it was, she's quite sort of brave. She sort of started just talking about the number of racist jokes that she routinely hears in school. And she literally was talking to her classmates that she was like, y'all. And she was like, yeah, you know, I don't think it's intentional that y'all are saying this or doing these things, but it still hurts. And so then she turns to me and just asked me, you know, what do I think about like racist jokes? Because some people say it's not a big deal. And so I actually asked the students, how many of you have seen a funny racist meme on social media? And literally, at least half of the students raised their hand. And half of the students, right? And I suspect more of them probably have seen, but they may not have been willing to raise their hand, or may they not have recognized that it was a racist meme. And so I'm mentioning that because I think it's important to understand the scale of what even white students are being exposed to on, let's say, social media. And the reason why these memes are funny is because the producers of them want those who are consuming them to not see them as a problem. So it's literally handing somebody poison in a treat. And so, because, you know, it tastes good, you don't know you're injecting and internalizing the poison. And so how is that white student going to be able to protect themselves against the message in that meme if nobody's teaching them about racism? How are they going to be able to protect themselves? How is a white student who plays multiplayer video games where racist ideas are also notorious if they can't recognize those ideas? And then, you know, that child who has seen years of sort of racist memes, who has heard sort of racist ideas on multiplayer video games, have seen them on television, in the media, no one's talking to them about them, they're internalizing them. Eventually, when they're 15 years old, they literally get targeted and recruited by a neo-Nazi organization as they are literally targeting and recruiting young white children, and then they turn 17 or 18 and they shoot up a school. And people are like, what happened? How did that happen? And then they just blame the parents, right? As opposed to the larger sort of atmosphere in which that child was raised. And you know what's striking is the very people who are taking books about racism out of those children's hand are also saying they care about those children.
Oh, is it on me? Oh, okay. A question from the audience is, in speaking with empowering youth, what is one thing you can recommend for early childhood educators in continuing DEIA work in classrooms while, what does that say? Funding. Yeah, while funding for Head Starts is on shaky ground?
So I actually would really encourage educators and teachers who are trying to figure out how to navigate an atmosphere and potentially even a school district that is preventing you from teaching, let's say, the truth about society or about history. I would actually encourage those educators to actually study what Black teachers did in the Jim Crow South. So those Black teachers were handed books that said that Black people lived in barbaric Africa, and these civilizers went over there and brought them into American slavery, where they were civilized and it was a positive good, and then there was a war of northern aggression against the South and its states' rights, which then not only took away the sovereignty of those states, but also prevented those white enslavers from continuing to civilize those black people. So then they reverted back to their barbaric ways and started engaging in criminality. That was the story. Those were the types of textbooks that were handed to black teachers to teach black children. So I suspect you can figure out that they didn't want to teach those textbooks. Right, so there are all sorts of reports in which you have that textbook, and over top of that textbook is like a book by Carter G. Woodson, and they're literally reading from the Carter G. Woodson book and teaching the Carter G. Woodson book. But then in case an administrator comes in, they close the textbook, and so then they see, the assigned book. So there are all sorts of ways. I'm just one example, and I would just encourage people to read up. There's a great book by a Harvard education professor called Fugitive Pedagogy that actually sort of documents some of this.
Another question from the audience. In regards to his mother's brokenness, for a lack of better word, you touched on healthcare. The lack of healthcare could be the primary cause of many black women being misdiagnosed, not only for mental health, but physical health. When or how do we bring this issue to the forefront to get healthcare rights?
So this is an incredibly important issue. And let me just say, there are all sorts of racial health disparities in this country. And I thought that I was going to help to simplify this incredibly complex conversation around racism. And that, not necessarily simplify, let me say clarify this conversation and say, you know what, if there's a racial disparity, there's a racial health disparity, if black women are dying as a result of pregnancy-related complications at 3 times the rates of white women, then there's probably some racist practices and policies that are leading to that. It's not because there's something wrong with black women. And I tried to present that when you have a racial disparity, there's 2 causes. There's 2 potential causes. Either it's the result of racist policies, or it's the result of a particular racial group being superior and inferior. So either black people are dying at higher rates from cancer because we have some sort of biological disposition to cancer, or because we're, quote unquote, not taking care of ourselves as much as white people are, or it's because of racist policies and practices. And I thought that that would allow the American people to have a very clear sense of what the problem was, as opposed to continuing to think who the problem was. But it became too clarified. And so, apparently, we don't want to think in a clear way about racism and about what the problem is, but that's frankly what we need to return to, in which if we're seeing a racial health disparity, we're not trying to figure out what's genetically distinct and inferior about a particular racial group, or that they just need to take care of themselves better. We need to figure out what are the policies and practices that are actually causing that.
Okay, another question before we move on. Oops, so sorry. Another question before we move on. If Malcolm X were alive today, what do you think he would be doing today during this administration to lead us?
So I actually, one of his greatest speeches was called Message to the Grassroots, which he gave in, I believe, November of 1963 in Detroit, where I'm actually headed to tomorrow. And in this speech, he specifically talked about what a revolution is and what a revolution is not. To give an example, he said in this speech, a revolution is not that black people and white people are able to take a shit together in the same toilet. That's not a revolution. I'm mentioning this because I think that this administration is engaging in a revolution. And those of us who are serious about resisting it, we just can't resist it. We have to engage in what they have long called a counter-revolution. So we need our own counter-revolution. And I think that Malcolm X would be encouraging us to think that boldly and radically.
Another question from the audience is, for women of color, this problem still exists today.
Ask that again?
Yeah, that's it.
That's the end?
Yeah, that's it.
So yes, women. So women of color are still being subjected, and frankly, I've been engaged in this tour, but I've seen that there's actually quite a bit of conversation on social media over the last few days around the P. Diddy case, and specifically around the number of people who are literally defending or trying to exonerate the violence that P. Diddy engaged in. And I know that a lot of women of color in particular are completely outraged, as are, I suspect, women in general, that, we can live in a country where we have people who are defending someone who engaged in sexual assault, domestic violence, and then that very same country and most of those victims, of course, were black women and other women of color. And then that very same country is ruled by somebody who has engaged in a form of sexual assault for dozens of women who are predominantly white. So this is sort of situation that allows us to see and even understand why they're not just banning books about racism, they're also banning books about sexism. And certainly banning books that talk about the intersection of racism and sexism.
Okay. Another question from the audience is, what would Malcolm X's message be to the youth if he was still alive today?
So I remember another speech that Malcolm gave, and it was in 1964. And Malcolm was so inspired by young people, particularly young people who were engaged in civil rights activism. And I think that Malcolm would be inspired by the young people today who are engaged in anti-racist activism. And I suspect that Malcolm would be speaking to them and really inspiring their fearlessness. And I remember I'm thinking about this speech in which he's talking about this sort of new generation and that sort of rising up and is challenging power. And he's talking about that new generation as not afraid of jail. And he actually says, particularly in this case, he's talking about black youth who are unafraid of jail. And he's like, yeah, they're not afraid of jail because if you're black, you were born in jail. And I think he's sort of speaking into existence, how can you fear jail when you're confronted with policies that literally bar you? And then he also goes on to say, in the North as well as the South, stop talking about the South. If you're south of the Canadian border, you're in the South.
Do you have educators working on curriculum to accompany this amazing text?
Yes.
this one's from the audience. Years ago, I read your book Stamped from the Beginning, and it inspired me to pursue my doctorate in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in education. So as a white teacher, what are ways I can talk about race, equity, and inclusion without sounding like a white savior?
So typically, white people sound like a white savior when they're actually engaging with people of color about these topics. And so if you're actually educating and challenging and striving to move other white people, you're actually not sounding or operating like a white savior. If anything, you're engaging in a way that black people think should, and I should say people of color more broadly, you're engaging in a different type of saving that's actually constructive. In other words, I think it's important for white Americans to recognize it's on them to save themselves from racism. I think it's important for white people to recognize that they have been hoodwinked, that they have been led astray, that they have been manipulated into believing that the source of their challenges are people who don't look like them, as opposed to the people who are exploiting them and subjugating them. And so for you to actually save another white person who somehow believes that a billionaire who accepts $400 million airplanes from a country he called a financer of terrorism is actually going to help them when they're making $30,000 a year. For you to be able to save that person from that delusion is actually a good thing.
More round of applause for Dr. Kendi. Thank you to everyone who was here. Thank you to Gloria Neal and Cody Egert. Thank you to our teen leaders. We really, I'm grateful that you all were here, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. I hope as you're leaving, a last conversational ideas just to talk about with your group or with someone new, talk about something you learned tonight. But yeah, let's close it out. Let's thank all of our conversants up here.